Allow me to introduce one of our speakers. Jonathan Gustin is the founder and lead teacher of Purpose Guides Institute. Jonathan has been a psychotherapist, meditation teacher, and purpose guide for 25 years. He's also the founder of Green Sangha and is a co-author of Purpose Rising with Ken Wilber and others. Jonathan guides people to, quote, find the place where their deepest gladness and the world's deep hunger meet, in the words of Frederick Buechner. He has been offering his flagship Purpose Discovery program for 20 cohorts and has also been training those who want to become purpose guides themselves. If you'd like more information about the upcoming Purpose Discovery program or our 8-week meditation program, you can read about those in the email following this event. And welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Really appreciate that intro. And I would like to introduce Adyashanti. Let's get him up there on the screen. He is my spiritual teacher, my very good friend, the author of The Impact of Awakening and My Secret is Silence. And he's a man who lives an ordinary life while demonstrating an extraordinary gift for transmitting a simple truth. Liberation is the birthright of us all. Awakening to his true nature after many years of Zen practice, he spent several more years developing and embodying this realization, and with the encouragement of his teacher, began teaching in 1996. His teachings have been the source of inspiration and awakening for thousands of students from many diverse traditions. So good to have you here, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. What a wonderful introduction. Maybe I'll live up to it someday.
Maybe. You never know. You never know. Well, we have a short amount of time, so I just want to
let's dive in.
Right in. Yeah. So we called this program Climate Change as Spiritual Teacher. So caveat number one, this isn't to say that climate change is the only huge, ecological event. We have, deforestation and ocean acidification and ecosystem collapse and species loss. I mean, just extinction. So please know we are pushing climate change to the foreground for many reasons today, but we really understand that it's part of a whole thing. I mean, overshoot, civilization collapse. I mean, the list goes on, but we're going to kind of hone in. And also in a moment, I'm going to interview Adya, and just so you know where I'm coming from, I will be using words like consciousness, spirit, awareness, God, more or less synonymously. So just so you know where the interviewer is coming from. So let's jump in. So we're going to do an interview, and then there'll be a council, there'll be a meditation, some Q&A, a personal action exploration, and then we'll be done. So Adya, I guess I'll just say it right out. Are you personally invested in the outcome of climate change? And the other question, because I'm sort of disambiguating this as if there was two Adyas and you don't have to put up with that nonsense. Does consciousness care? Is it invested in the outcome of climate change?
Well, the first one is easy to answer. I'm certainly invested in climate change. I think just speaking in generalities, nature has been my greatest teacher. Where I live now, in the last couple of years, the Sierra Nevada mountains I've often said, these have been my cathedral. This has been my sacred space my entire life, way before I got into spirituality even. So yeah, it's a really important thing, not just for me personally, but of course this affects not just all of us, but all of species, all of life, everything. So sure, it's a real thing, and of course it's concerning. Yeah. Consciousness. This may sound strange for me as a spiritual teacher to say, but I wouldn't really want to speak for consciousness. I don't know that consciousness is actually for or against anything. or the awareness that we have is for or against anything. That doesn't mean that you and I or somebody else shouldn't be for and against things, right? Because we are, consciousness expressing itself through a human being, and human beings very much do have, our points of view and things that are concerning to us. Maybe it will be one of those themes we touch in a few times, Jonathan, I think during this day would be my guess, would be we do, as I see it, we do sort of embody these two aspects, right? In spirituality, they've often been called the absolute and the relative, and or the transcendent and the mundane and all of that. But in us, for when we get back out of the more philosophical way of talking about that, I think in each of us, we have our points of view, we have things that are important to us, we have our passions, our interests, and there's awareness just shining through it all, right? And it doesn't seem to have a preference, but that's the amazing thing about a human being, is we're a kind of a conglomeration of these aspects.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, quite all right.
Well, okay, so let's dig into that a little deeper.
Yeah.
So Adyashanti is invested, and you wouldn't want to speak for the absolute, which I totally understand. So now the question is, how do these coexist in one person, you? So on the one hand, you're invested. On the other hand, the absolute may very well not be, pushing its chips one way or another. How do these inform? So you care, and yet absolute, awakening or enlightenment may have no particular stand. So how do these coexist in you, the total you?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jonathan. So the way they exist, and by the way, before I say this, they'll even somebody who's, very clear spiritually, this equation isn't the same for everyone, right? There's as much diversity in this as anything else in life. But how they sit with me, I've already expressed my concern about the environment, which actually really comes out of a love of it, a deep and profound love for the environment and all of us human beings that play around in it. And if I just focused on that could become more and more and more anxiety producing, fear, anxiety. That's just a natural point of that particular viewpoint. That doesn't mean that viewpoint is in any way wrong or less valid than any viewpoint. That's just, we have certain investments in it. So, and then for me, with what we would in spirituality often call a more absolute perspective, or when we kind of awaken to a more transcendent perspective, that's the perspective that is, there's a saying in Zen which sounds almost silly in its simplicity, but it is simply that every day is a good day. And that doesn't mean on a relative level, every day is a good day. We have good days and terrible days and everything in between, but it's really trying to articulate not a philosophy, but an actual living experience, right? And that what's trying to be articulated there in my experience is this sense that everything is sort of eternally, absolutely okay, even when it's not. Now, as I'm trying to articulate an experience, right, Jonathan? And the only way I can do that is to talk in a way that sounds a little philosophical, even though the philosophical, I'm not even interested. I'm just trying to answer your question in terms of experiential mode. I think any human being who dives deep enough in themselves will find some version. It'll be their version, but it'll be some version of this, that sense of everything is strangely always internally okay. And lots of things are simultaneously very much not okay. And I think that's our totality, right? As a human being, that's we do contain multitudes, as my favorite poet Walt Whitman said, right? I also liked what he said in a line or two before that. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I'm large. I contain multitudes. And we are all like that. And I think even at the deeper level of reality, you do bump into these aspects of being that from an intellectual point can seem contradictory, but from an experiential point, they can actually rest together really, really quite well, I think. Yeah.
So let's get into the lived experience for you. So
Yeah.
I love this paradox. The closer we get to paradox, the closer I think we get to truth. But I want to help people to feel what it might be to be in your shoes.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, everything is always already okay. So if you're watching TV and you see, I don't know, George Floyd being murdered, or you see another species has gone totally extinct, or the methane burps are just, whatever it may be, do you experience heartbreak?
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the paradoxical nature, because I can experience a kind of deep okayness and at times a real heartbreak, just your garden variety human heartbreak, of what we're doing, of the damage we've caused and the suffering that's a part of that. I would never want to use my experience of transcendence to save me from the experience of heartbreak like that. I want to experience that, even though it's not as comfortable as the more transcendent position. It feels, the only thing that feels real to me is when the two are just coexisting. And so how that lives in me as a sense, as an experience, it's different all the time, Jonathan, to be quite honest with you. Like sometimes I can see some degradation of the environment. I watch it on TV or I read about it, and I can have sort of heartbreak, let's say, almost, first and foremost. And then sometimes, almost always relatively quickly, the deeper sort of true nature, transcendent aspect comes in, not to wipe it out, but as a balance. Other times I'll read something and it's like the transcendent perspective is very, very strong. And so I won't get that heartbreak initially, but the heartbreak will come after I've experienced the transcendent a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So sometimes one comes first, sometimes the other, sometimes they coexist in the same moment. But it's, at least for me, it's always a little different each time I encounter, say, new information or something like that,
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you is that one or the other could be in the foreground initially, but the wholeness, the totality of you, there will be that enlightened, open, empty awareness, totally equanimous. But then at some point, maybe later, or maybe first up, will be that, I call it heartbreak, but it can be sadness, grief. So I think one thing that people will want to know is like, would abiding enlightenment save me from heartbreak, grief, and anger?
No, it might actually make it worse.
Say more.
Well, of course, it depends on how we interpret and utilize awakening, which may sound strange to some people, but both of those things are. Can you repeat your question for me again, Jonathan?
Yeah. So one question is that, so I'm imagining some people, like I used to wonder out loud to myself, if I ever, got a bad case of abiding enlightenment, would I finally be totally equanimous at all times? And my wife and son, I wouldn't be okay, and global warming could happen. Will it save me from pain and suffering?
Yeah. Well, it can save you from a lot of pain and suffering, a lot of what I call, optional pain and suffering. There's pain and suffering in life that's not optional. Like it's just going to happen, but there's the other stuff that's more around our narrative, I think, the only thing especially with an issue like this, or actually almost any issue, the only thing that I trust in my own experience is when these sort of perspectives come together, is when they're there simultaneously. When one is there in the absence of the other. That can happen, of course, but that I'm not going to base any of my decisions on that, whether it's the relative or the absolute. I'll experience it, but it's only when they're really there together that then I will trust that as something to motivate me to whatever I'm going to do, to act or to participate or not.
So you come back to the human. If first there are mountains, then there are no mountains, and then back to mountains.
Yes. Can I give a 30-second really short story, which I really loved, that just encapsulates this. And this was by another Zen teacher who's no longer with us, Robert Aiken. He was one of the first early American Zen teachers. And he was talking about the absolute and the transcendent and all of that. And one of his students raised their hand and said, let me see if I get this straight. If I understand what you're saying, let's imagine the whole world just, goes up in a ball of flame. And this wasn't in relation to global warming necessarily, but they were just trying to figure out the worst thing they could think of. If that happened, if the whole world went up in flames or blew up or whatever, are you telling me from the absolute perspective, all that would be totally okay? And Robert just said, yes. Pause. And then he said, but what about all the blood? That's what I'm trying to get to. That's what was his way of saying, yes, from that perspective, it's all okay, actually. But there's this little thing called the blood, the suffering, the turmoil, you know what I mean? And it was his way of saying, we can't, nor should we easily dismiss that just because we can feel really good and at peace in the absolute. We shouldn't forget the blood.
Yeah. Well, you've firmly established that you are not advocating for yourself or anybody else to hang out permanently in the absolute. It's the integrated, full functioning of the total. Okay, beautiful.
Exactly. And I think that has a lot to do with what we're talking about today also, right? Because then it gets down to, what are we basing our action on? Where's our motivation coming from? All those deeper questions of what's actually driving us. I think we can see those issues more clearly when we have some access, certainly to our deeper true nature. But as I said, the spiritual personality. Not all of us, I'll put myself in there too, but quite a few, there can be that sense of you're kind of utilizing your access to peace and tranquility and balance to kind of save you from these difficult emotions of something like we're talking about today, right?
Yeah.
Something that can be very frightening and very big and vast.
I'm curious about your speculation around the Buddha, because he seemed to say or imply to many of us in those noble truths that enlightenment would be the cessation of suffering through the ceasing of attachment. Mm-hmm. So if I read that correctly, so is there a way? It seems many people are taking that to mean you just kind of pop out of samsara and exist in some heavenly nirvana over and over for endless, countless.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
Do you take it? It's like, wouldn't that be great? Is that what he was saying? I didn't get into it for that actually, but I know some people really would like the end of suffering. They've had a lot more suffering than maybe I have.
Of course.
So then the question is it you're still going to experience, heartbreak and grief, but it's the attachment to a particular outcome. How do you?
It's the attachment to outcome, and it's that cause a lot of problems. Also, when we have attachment to our narrative, whatever our narrative is, without the attachment, without the narrative, we can still have a heartbreak because we're directly encountering life, and sometimes life is heartbreaking.
Yeah. So let's talk about belief systems. So
let me just circle back really quickly. Yeah. My sense, and I'm never going to speak for the Buddha. He's long gone. My sense though, is I think what he was really orienting there was what I call optional suffering. If you put Buddha back in one of those 15th century fires because they said the wrong thing, and the church decided they shouldn't have said that, and so they burned them to death. I kind of think that would be pretty difficult for the Buddha. You know what I mean? That would be, I don't think it's so, this idea that, enlightenment, this is a whole different subject. It can really eliminate vast amounts of optional suffering. Of course, a lot of optional suffering doesn't feel optional. So, but it can do that. But it's not going to, just guarantee we're going to get this pass on the difficulties of existence. That's a myth, and it's also highly egocentric. Because it's like spiritual. I'm involved in this, so I feel as good as possible all the time.
Yeah,
that's where like the certain compassions that all the religions have around compassion, and caring for others. These are protective things. Like, don't get lost. Experience the absolute or the Godhead or whatever you want to call it. But don't get lost there. Compassion is the link between the absolute and the relative. Right? That's how they're almost like communicating in a way. Like, this is all metaphor, you might say, but compassion and love and these kind of things are they're the primary means of communication. And we can be not okay and okay simultaneously.
We can be okay and not okay simultaneously. And it is the human heart and its compassion that is the link between the relative and the absolute.
I think so. So. My teacher used to have a wonderful phrase: the you who's okay even when you're not okay. And that's an interesting thing, not just to hear, but to explore. Like, when you're not okay, is there a little corner in you that's actually totally okay? Even being okay with not being okay. And if we just sort of peek into that corner, we might find that corner is actually much more expansive than we ever imagined,
So let's work with the part of me that is not okay. I know that part, the part that's okay.
Sure.
That's online for me. However, there's part of me that is so upset by industrial civilization and overshoot and the collapse we're causing and so forth. And sometimes it kind of keeps rolling. And so one question I have for you is, are there, and use your own words, but I'm going to call it limited or false belief systems or mental states that reinforce that not okayness, that we don't want to get rid of it, but we don't want it to continually spool us out and drain us and make us just miserable. A miserable activist probably is not so sustainable. So what would be your guidance when I'm feeling I'm stuck?
It's a really big question, Jonathan.
I know.
But it's an important one because, when we have things that we're passionate and caring, and if we do feel called to be an activist in some manner, I think it's incumbent upon us. Part of the responsibility of deciding to do that is to take a deep dive into our own motivations. And what I mean by that deep dive into our motivations, that will include like the influences that we've had, often from very, very young, that are part of what's driving us along. And everybody has their own conditioning from the time they're born. And if we don't really look at that, like how is my own particular narrative and life experience playing into how I'm feeling right now and how I'm responding, right? So if I'm really, really, let's say I touch upon this subject and I get really angry, right? Then we have to go, okay, a certain amount of anger around that, totally natural, right? It's totally natural. It's at least in spiritual mindsets, we often have this idea that anger is almost never appropriate. It's just another one of the human emotions we have. So a little bit of that, totally fine. But if it's like this thing where we get captured, I think that's where we should have our our attention, when we feel, when you feel captured by something, an emotion, you see, you're watching TV, you see whatever, some polluter tearing, rainforest down, right? But and some of that is natural, but when we feel caught, that's an important thing. I mean, for anybody, of course, but especially in these kind of things, because I think we have to at least start by admitting that in this case, it's the global challenge that we have with climate and all that. But this is also this phenomena that we're experiencing for each of us. It's tying back in with our entire life. And the way we react to it also has a lot to do with our entire life. So I'm not interested about helping save anybody from a particular emotion. What I'm interested in is when you feel caught, right? Because when we feel caught, then the emotion is driving you, right? And we see a lot of that today in all sorts of areas, where that's driving us. So,
Well, I think that's a brilliant insight, Adya, because there's the facts of climate change, although people have different views on that, and that's fine. Right. There's our understandable heartbreak and response, but as you're saying, sometimes subconsciously or semi-consciously, there's our entire lifetime and who we are and how we're wired that is brought to bear on the situation, and that maybe counts for a wide amount of a big part of why people have such different responses to the same facts.
And there's something deep in the subconscious that kind of likes to create lines. Good guys, bad guys, that's just what it does. And, there are more beneficial and less beneficial players in all this. Of course, there are that. And yet and of course, you ever notice we always like to see ourselves on the right side of any issue, right? Because that becomes part of our identity too. So I just think when if we're, this isn't the right word, but fighting for climate change, let's say in some way, or advocating, that like I said, we just need to be, it becomes even more incumbent upon us to just be really aware of these dynamics within ourselves. I mean, look, the most common one I'm sure you see a lot, right, is people when they encounter climate change, because it is so huge, right? And any good psychologist will tell us we're not really adept. We haven't evolved to deal with these kind of issues. We're not actually, and that's an important thing to acknowledge, right? What we're adept at is what's right in my sphere of influence, right? That's why if you can save one child that's in some way they're being harmed or something in your sphere of influence, it's right over there, or you can save 100 children that you've never seen and you don't know, most people are going to save the one child that's right there that they do know. That's human nature. And that's worked for us, evolutionary, really quite well. But now we're having to expand the circle of our regard, the circle of our love, our concern. And that takes us beyond whatever our little field is. And that's challenging, right? It's not easy to do.
Indeed. Well, I want to open up the conversation a little bit. So I'm going to ask for a person who identifies with both of these things. One, you think climate change is a huge problem. Your heart aches, but Adya did the fish on the hook thing twice. Caught. So you are self-identified as caught, and it's your judgment of you, not mine. So I'd like to invite two people. You can raise your digital hand by going to participants and raising your hand. Catherine will pick two of those people, and they'll come onto the screen. And as we do that, one question that came up was, what do you mean by optional suffering? I'm not sure that was clear for everybody.
It wasn't clear. I didn't describe that at all. So pardon me for that. And optional, I just want to make very clear, it's not the best term, right? Because the way people can hear optional, they can, if they're suffering, they can feel, well, I'm somehow choosing this, and then they get all guilty. That's not what I mean at all. What I mean by optional, for the most part, is that suffering that is created primarily by the way we talk to ourselves about ourselves.
Mm.
And that's what I mean by optional. Say
What's
someone
an example?
Well, our narrative. Now, this is kind of it's a tricky thing, right? Because we do think, and we do have a narrative, and especially with big issues, we want to think through those very, very clearly and cleanly in a way. But I'm talking about that narrative that runs almost on automatic pilot, right? That's talking to you about yourself, or talking to you endlessly about others or the world, and it just da 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 da. And if that's all it was, fine, okay, a little bit of annoying talk. But to the extent that we take that as real and true, then we suffer.
Okay.
Right? Then we suffer. And that's, and don't take it completely concretely, because that's where we get a little into some challenges. We've got to hold this loosely. But I would, instead of simply defining it, Jonathan, like I've kind of given my best shot. I know it, and it's difficult. It's difficult for me to define it. But I would just suggest that anybody in our listening audience, that they can watch what causes you suffering, right? What causes you suffering? And as you really watch it, instead of being so fast to try to alleviate it all the time, watch it really, really closely. And when we start to see, oh, that suffering, that looked kind of pretty unavoidable there, whatever it was, maybe you had a death of a loved one or something like that, right? If you went through the death of a loved one and you felt zero, that wouldn't be a good sign. That wouldn't be a good sign. So you're going to suffer some amount, maybe just missing and whatever. That's not necessarily a narrative. Right? That's just you're encountering a very human, gritty reality.
The extra layer of narrative that causes an increase, an elongation of suffering, is what you're sort of pointing
often
to with optional.
The way we talk to ourselves about our experience.
Okay.
Yeah. And then that hurts, right? So if you're doing therapy as a therapist, like most cognitive therapy, let's say, I'm not a therapist, but that works on a cognitive basis, they realize this. That's a lot of our suffering, again, not all of it, but big proportion of it is a cognitively generated process primarily. And that's why we can change our thoughts. And hey, we can feel so much better. It's because it existed up here to begin with. Or maybe we do a different version like I tend to do. I don't tend to go from negative to positives.
Mm-hmm.
I say, well, there's a negative and there's a positive. Those are the two kind of extremes. And there's always something other than negative or positive. There's something in between. Good. We might even even though this might be a stretch for some people to understand this, and I understand that, which would be maybe what in between is something more like, the word that keeps coming to me, Jonathan, is love. Something like that, Like, you got to care. You can't just like, oh, look at those silly, stupid thoughts in my head. I think I need to get rid of those. It doesn't work, does it? Anybody listening, you've tried to get rid of thoughts you don't like, and that doesn't work. Just trying to get rid of anything. But when you have a sense of compassion, oh, look at that poor mind just doing the best it can, and it's thinking those thoughts, and oh, I know where that came from a lifetime, and well, the poor thing just doesn't know what to do. And I'm not necessarily saying those things, but as an attitude, we can approach our own minds with compassion. That tends to work. If you approach it as the enemy, that almost never works. I remember very distinctly when my teacher told me, because I was having a lot of trouble with my mind when I first started meditating, he said, if you go to war with your mind, you'll be at war forever. I was in it, right? Forever. That's a long time. That just began a process. Like, what would it be not to go to war with my mind? What would that be like? What would I do? What would I change? How would my relationship with my own, all these questions became important to me.
So if I hear you correctly, it's not a rejection of the facts that there's global heating. It's 1.2, I think, Fahrenheit, or Celsius above. It's not rejecting the emotional heartache or heartbreak. Right. It is, however, noticing that there are thoughts that come up and go, no, absolutely not. And that is partly love, like I would not want this to happen. But if you grip onto that, like a death grip, and hold on to that, you're fighting reality, and you're just gonna,
Yeah. Here's a great quick summation story of that. This is many years ago. I was teaching, maybe 20 years ago, and I was talking about to a woman, and she had her, her consciousness had really opened up. And part of that, though, is we become far more sensitive, right? And part of what, we don't just become sensitive to the good stuff. We become sensitive to everything. And so she was feeling really overwhelmed with her own opening, because whatever her background was, that she just couldn't quite let in she was taking in like a global suffering, right? She could feel it. And there is a development in our own consciousness when we can really tap into that. And it's really quite immense. And you'd better have some real spiritual training when you bump into it. Otherwise it can really be something else. So she was really having this huge trouble with this, right? And I told her what my head teacher had said, which was, yeah, it's really heartbreaking. But the whole point is you have to let your heart break wide open. I said, you're protecting yourself. You don't see it because all you feel is the suffering. But what it would be just to open to even all of that, like throw it wide open and see what happens. That's what I had done years before with my teacher's encouragement. Yeah, life can be heartbreaking, but let it break you open. We have a lot of like half broken hearts, right? Half open, but then we protect ourselves. It's too much. It's overwhelming. I can't. But when we can kind of just let it really open up, that's when the deeper kind of more universal love or compassion starts to become accessible. And it's not like we don't experience the suffering anymore, but then it's not overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
Because you and I or anybody else, we're not at our best when we're overwhelmed.
No.
If we were going to look at this purely through a lens of strategy, overwhelm isn't a great strategy, even though almost all of us will feel it from time to time.
Yeah.
And it's understandable. And yet it's not a great emotion to base our next action on.
Yeah.
Maybe something more like, when I say love or compassion, I'm not just talking about something airy, right? I mean, gritty compassion does something, right? It doesn't just sit in this room going, I feel so compassionate for all of humanity as I sit on my couch. No, gritty compassion is, I feel what's going on with humanity. What can I do? Right? Just gritty. And which is can be an antidote to a lot of overwhelm, which is do something. Write your senator. Start small, but actually just do something so you don't just feel like you're just taking all this in and you just feel overwhelmed. It's funny how even the smallest of actions can make us feel so much more empowered.
Amen.
And even more than individually, we might actually have a positive effect on the world around us.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be cool?
Catherine, I'm waiting to have two people come on and highlighted so we can speak with them. And great. So I'm just going to ask you to keep it short, Claudia, around the question is the heartbreak and particularly the getting stuck. Same thing with you, Pam. So Claudia, please share with us, where are you getting stuck?
I had very intense last 15 months here in Spain. I'm running a completely off-grid yoga retreat house since 22 years in the middle of nowhere with solar power. And we are involved since 15 months in the so-called European Green Deal, which goes massively wrong in Europe. And the whole countryside in Spain, where very few people are living, gets attacked, gets expropriated. I saw thousands of trees in the last years getting cut down for solar fields. It was a horrible situation, and so my main word became the injustice, and it broke my heart. And I am in Buddhism, and it helps a lot. And so in June, I just went on a silence retreat because I couldn't cope with anything anymore. And then it came to, yes, do something, accept. And it happened to me. I was lucky that my heart broke so much that it broke open. And I'm in a very, very strange state. So there's more and more environmental fighters in the last month. We're fighting against a monster. It's international companies from all over the world destroying Spain.
So Claudia, thank you so much for giving us
today. There was a big yeah. So yeah.
Claudia,
so
is there one place where you're feeling stuck?
Yeah. Yeah, I felt stuck with the injustice, and it got into panic. And I can confirm that it works, that the heart can break open again. And then the situation is as worse as it was before, but somehow there's acceptance and hope, and by just doing something. And that's where I stop. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Claudia. I appreciate that. And I also, appreciate the work that you do and the way that the intention you've brought around your yoga studio and things like that. And I think just like, we can kind of protect ourselves a little bit from the heart getting really wide open. There can even be specific issues that come up. Like you said, the one that was particularly triggering was around justice or injustice, right? And injustice, of course, that's a sort of philosophical idea, but it's also sort of a lived experience in us of injustice. And just the way we maybe not sort of let go of trying to protect our heart from what's going on, let it break open. We can do the same thing around almost any issue that we feel caught with. So say injustice, right? And like I said, it's this feeling that can overwhelm people. And the fact is, there is injustice in the world. There's always been injustice. That doesn't mean it's okay, but that's just been part of the world we live in. But what would happen if we really opened fully to that also? And I'm saying this not only so we can, come to a better place internally and feel better, but also something that's even beyond, the us as individuals would be, I think it actually allows us to be much more effective in whatever work that we do, right? When we just encounter whatever we feel stuck on, that would be where my mind goes. Since you've done it with the heartbreak, you got the feeling of it. Once you get the sort of sense and the feeling of it, you can kind of apply it to almost anything that you really feel caught on. Because a lot of the negative emotions, one of the reasons they recycle, again, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that we recycle is because they're not fully experienced. And we think because something felt really strong, that therefore it was fully experienced. But experiencing something in a really strong way doesn't necessarily mean that we've fully experienced, simply means we've experienced it without any reservation, without any holding back. Yeah.
Thank you, Adya, and thank you, Claudia.
Yeah.
Let's go to Pam.
Hi, Pam.
Where are you feeling stuck?
Thank you for having the space.
Yeah.
I'm actually working on the number of humans on the earth and the imbalance that it appears that we are in, given the biodiversity loss and all of that. And the whole idea of suggesting to folks that maybe they have one less child for the benefit of the whole, or so my stuckness is, how do you approach this very, very life essential topic? And lately I've been thinking about, well, we're in a whole different place on Earth than we ever have been before. And so now it's time for a different perspective about having children. And so I'm looking for the right place to do this work, the right attitude. And but I think the biggest thing is just, is this topic an okay one? I mean, how do you do this topic? Because there are death threats to people who are willing to speak about this.
Yeah. Sticking, sort of, as the old saying goes, sticking your neck out.
Yeah.
You probably really feel that, right? When you, anytime we're kind of going against what feels like the grain of culture or society or what, that's, you'll very, very much feel that. How to be with it is, I think, at least the beginning of it is to recognize that that's just part of being outside of what we would consider the norm in this sense, right? Saying things that might challenge people, that make us think about things that aren't comfortable. I don't think we should ever come to things like that expecting that we won't get some pretty good pushback, because it's intimidating, right? Even to think about it, it's scary. And so, I think to engage in any of this kind of work takes some real courage and a lot of open-mindedness also, because the truth is we don't really yet know what's going to get us out of this. If anything, we don't have it all. We're not even remotely close to having this sort of figured out. So I think we can be engaging in what we feel passionate about, but I think it's also important to have a really open mind that new information is coming in constantly on a daily basis, but let's say weekly, monthly basis. And but I can have sympathy for that, trying to say things that are not easily for people to even contemplate. But I'll share you. I mean, I know I'm in a different situation, of course, but at least as a teacher, and I understand it's very different, right? The people that are coming to me are very, very different. And yet, what I've noticed is, I've been many times when I've thought, wow, if I talk about this, I might lose half of my audience, And whenever I feel that, I know I have to talk about it, because it usually has something that's really real and can be very beneficial, but not easy. What I've noticed though, and I understand this is different in when you're doing things with climate, it's different than a spiritual teacher kind of thing. But I've noticed when I can be just very truthful with people, and very honest, but without pushing my agenda. What I've noticed is almost without exception, every single one of those things that I thought, no one's going to want to hear this, if I can deliver it in the right way, not only do they hear it, but those are inevitably the talks that are the most popular. I think there is something, because the only thing we can hope for, Pam, I think, is we can, when we're engaging with each other or talking to people about big issues, is we're connecting with people that can really hear us, right? If someone's not ready or willing to hear us, well, there's not a lot that we can do. But those that are or want to engage, then they will hear. But it takes courage, doesn't it?
Yes, it
It
does.
really does. Because you'll get a lot of blowback, and I'm sure you've
Yes.
already gotten plenty of it,
Yeah.
right? If anybody that does anything around this gets, it's a very emotional kind of, and especially when you get into birth rates and all that, well, then you're really touching upon some very deep subjects. And I think that's useful to kind of know, because often what I'll think about when I want to present something that I think will be really challenging, I'll really try to put myself in the position of my audience and the most resistant people in my audience, or I just in imagination, and think, how could I talk to that person that would be constructive?
Yeah.
Right? I can cut them off. I can try to overwhelm them with just talk, or I can do how would I talk to that person? I find when I think about that beforehand, I get myself in there. Doesn't mean they're going to agree with me, but even now I've done this 27 years. I'm still amazed that when we're being truthful, it's weird to say this in today's world because it doesn't seem like truth has a whole lot of stock, you know what I mean? But in a human being's heart, I just keep watching people respond to it when I can present something in the right way. It doesn't mean all the responsibility is on the presenter, right? Sometimes there's no amount of way you talk that can do anything, but yeah.
I'm hearing a lot of humility, my own, speaking from my own truth.
Yeah.
With humility, knowing that I don't know it all. No one does. And this is something it's something worth considering.
There you go. Right. That's kind of the attitude that I'm trying to convey, because when you have that attitude, I just find people are much more receptive. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yeah, it is this paradox of what is it to embody your passion and things that are important to you, and at the same time embody humility, right? Too much humility and you can't really get your point across, right? Too little and it's hard for people to hear. There's something in there. There's something. One last thing, because I know, Jonathan, we don't want to take too much time, but just one last thing, Pam, and anybody. I do this anytime I talk to somebody at this point, it's like intuitive. I'm doing it without even intending, but for a long time I intended it, which was when I encounter somebody, the first thing that I'm intuitively feeling for, is that point of contact. It's just like this intuitive way I'm approaching someone. And because what I notice, the most important thing is I have to connect first. If I don't connect, it doesn't matter what I say. So I'm talking around a lot of things, Pam. I understand. Like, it's not the kind of issue that I can just zero in. Here's my response. But like most of these issues, they bring in a lot of threads, don't they, through our lives and human interactions. And it's not easy when you're really passionate, or we get scared or whatever, it's not easy to have that openness of really sensing the connection point with the other. That's
so important.
Yeah.
Thank you
And,
so much.
I reflect upon this all the time. I can, and it's very easy, and it's most of it is justifiable, the way we would criticize like the oil companies or the fertilizers or whatever they are. And to check my humility, I'll look in my garage and I'll go, okay, you got a car there and you're putting fossil fuel in that. And there's your heater that's heating your house and you're doing that. And, doing these things, which may or may not be necessities, but it just kind of like, okay, I'm concerned about all this stuff. And can I approach this without creating those lines of separation?
Mm.
Yeah.
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 Thank you so much.
I wish you well, Pam.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bless your heart.
You as well.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
Pam.
much.
Well, we have a ton of great questions coming in, but I think maybe we might take a little pivot to a guided meditation like we had discussed.
Oh, good timing.
I'll just attempt to summarize in a sentence. What I hear is that there's the fact of climate change, there's the arising of heartbreak, and then I hear your advice as something like the courage to be full-hearted in meeting that interior emotion. So I'm wondering if you might guide us a bit to
Sure.
it's nice to have someone holding our hand as we go right into the deepest grief. Maybe
Yeah.
10 minutes. I mean, I know
Okay.
it's a kind of short, but
That's okay. We can work with whatever time frame we got, my
Okay.
friend.
right.
Okay. If you wouldn't mind, I'm just so much in the habit of this. I'm just going to start us off with a little bell.
Great.
Okay. This seems to be a nice transition. So we just take just a moment and, as odd as this may sound, just take a moment and intentionally allow every part of your experience just to be exactly the way it is for a moment. Every part of it. Good, bad, everything in the middle. And if we really allow everything to be our whole experience, so we're not analyzing or justifying it or anything, just allowing it to be, you very often feel a certain sort of somatic relaxation. It might be subtle, but and see if you can just sort of let the locus of attention, which is so often literally or in and around our head, and just have the sense that was just sort of dropping down, that locus of attention from the head down through the chest, the heart, and just keep letting that locus of attention descend down there into the lower part of the belly. And just let it sit there, touch upon, rest right there in that lower part of the belly. Now, the lower part of the belly is actually where a lot of our deepest sort of existential fears, right? Survival, things to do with, money, along the terms of survival, of course, climate change. A lot of our deep survival issues are right down there in the belly, our deepest fears. And yet for the moment, we're just gazing, just letting attention right there in the belly, with a bit of courage, where you're just, whoa, whatever I'm going to feel, whatever it is. And let's just drop the phrase into your mind now. We want to see how your body mind reacts, right? There's no right way to do this. We're just experimenting. What happens in your body mind when I drop in the phrase climate change? Forest degradation. And whatever is the most triggering issue around this subject, just bring it up into your consciousness. This is the most triggering issue in relationship to this whole subject. It's a really difficult one. And just allow that to be in the space, right? So now that's completely allowed to be. The difficulty, the challenge, the anxiety, or the fear, or the upset, or the anger you might have had. I want you to hold it in a space where it's all okay. It's just experience. And we tend to hold experience quite unconsciously, but we hold experience in a kind of small container. So just imagine, just having a sort of imagination of whatever that container, that way we try to hold our emotion in check, contain our emotion, right? We're just gonna, it's not so much we're diving into the emotion as we're opening the container. It's like that emotion is now held in a container, and just open it wider and wider and wider and wider and wider until you can't feel the edges of any containment. And you're just feeling whatever there is to feel. Even if there's not much feeling, that's okay too. And in a meditation like this, if you start to feel that tension, you will almost always sort of find, you'll feel the walls of the container getting contracting back again. And just exhale and let that container around the emotion, around the feeling, open up and open and open. Just feel that. And notice how you've sort of dropped down into the middle part of your body, into the gut area, and how much more sort of centered that feels. It's like a boat with a lot of ballast, a lot of weight down in the bottom of it. And you can feel a certain sort of solidity, groundedness. And finally, this is just going to be a little switch of orientation. So usually when we have any kind of experience, especially anything that's challenging, again, we tend to narrow around it, constrict around it. And that can be noticed. And almost in the noticing of the constriction, it's already loosening a bit. And maybe you can have just a sort of taste here of an okayness. We could call it a sense of a certain sort of balance or peace, whatever word resonates, but just a deeper sense of peaceful balance, that it can just be there because we relax and open enough to notice it. And if there is still any kind of challenge of a particular emotion around it, just contemplate, which means watch what happens when you're kind of holding two things at the same time, this deeper sense of peace or balance, openness, with whatever they say that the emotional concern is. And now all we're doing is just letting those two exist simultaneously in the same space. Just holding them in awareness. Everything's totally okay. And maybe a little bit of feeling that something isn't okay. Consciously holding these opposites together. Now I would just invite you to kind of do this, at a later time when you can take even more time with it. Noticing when you get to a little more balanced place, you're holding, see what happens when you hold two opposing things together. Peace, let's just say perhaps turmoil, right? And just holding them. You're not trying to resolve them, correct them, get rid of one, holding them together and seeing what happens when you do that. Sometimes what I call the kind of the third view or the third perspective comes in, and that perspective, which is more inclusive. Okay. Couple rings of the bell. So this last thing we did in the meditation, I think, can really be, it takes some time, it's not like you do it for 5 minutes and it cures everything in you, but holding often these opposing or what feels like opposing feeling tones, right? Or emotions, peace, and some sort of difficulty or turmoil. We're so conditioned to try to resolve everything and get rid of what's not comfortable. But when we introduce these things together, there's a way that they blend and something else arises out of doing that. I don't want to say what it is because then we'll just hold on to it, but just watch what arises in your experience when you can hold these things together. I think a much more sort of healing and dynamic quality can arise. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Just want to unfold one question that came in the chat into this meditation. What does it mean to fully experience an emotion without
that's a great
reservation?
Question. That's a great question.
As opposed to being overwhelmed by it. I wonder if you could just end with a pith instruction.
Yes. Okay. We can either be overwhelmed by the emotion. Often people think when you open to emotion, it's like you're supposed to expand the emotion as much as you can. That's not what I'm talking about. We're leaving the emotion. We're just kind of leaving the poor thing alone, right? It's there. We're not trying to get rid of it, but we're opening the space around it, right? So we're not doing that human control thing. Oh, I don't like that, and I'm going to do this little maneuver to get rid of it. And we're not doing that. We're letting these things simultaneously exist. Yeah.
Great answer. So to fully
Solid.
experience isn't to perseverate only on the overwhelming feeling, but to simultaneously open the space
Yes.
around it.
I'm glad you circled back to that, Jonathan, because like I said, there's often a misperception that to open to emotion means like to fully. Now that may happen. Sometimes that emotion will get really big, but what we're really focused on is the space. We're giving a big space to the emotion instead of trying to do something with the emotion. Yeah, I think that's really
so it's
important.
the accent of attention. You're not being only the space, but
Right.
the accent of attention is on the space, and the minor, if it will, is still the emotion. You're still staying into full contact, full presence with it.
Right. Yes. And that will happen naturally when we just open the space around it. Right? Open the space around it. Yeah.
I'd love to have one person raise their hand who wishes to share just their experience of this meditation. So you can go to participants, raise your hand. Catherine, you can just right away put that person into our little twosome. It'll be a threesome. And we'd just like to, great, Teresa. So what was your experience?
Hi.
Hi,
It was
Teresa.
really interesting. And I've practiced bringing space into emotional intensity. So I went into the emotional intensity for me is cutting down old growth forests and or scraping the bottom of the sea by those go hand in hand. I'm also aware of the spaciousness of grace.
Mhm.
So I was being aware of that, the spaciousness, being aware of that. And I'm sitting there listening to you and thinking, but it's not okay. It's not okay to cut down forests. It's not okay to do that. And I'm going, so what do I do with that? How do I be with that? And then I went, it's okay to be not okay.
There you go.
And so I held that as in just was with that, noticing that. And at the very end, my mind drifted off to a place, and I would call this inspiration perhaps, but I don't know what to do with it. That'll come maybe. My mind went to taking of fossil fuels out of the earth and the realization that the earth always gives to us. She's forever giving to us. And my sadness around that is, and we don't appreciate, we're not aware. And wouldn't it be different if we had a different relation with that, realizing that she gives to us? And what if we all had a little bit of gratitude?
Yeah.
So that's where my meditation went.
Mm. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you sharing, because there's no right way, right? There's no right outcome. There's just opening, and then there's often a more creative dynamic that we access. I think that's a big part of the point, is you can. And I loved what you said, Teresa, around you realize it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
Right. When I turn on the TV or look on the news and I see, the wholesale slaughter of some huge forest, I don't feel okay about that either. Right. As a human being, I don't feel okay with that either. I can touch into the deeper thing that's okay. But there's still that's not, and it's okay that it's not okay. Yeah.
It has to be, right?
Yeah, sure.
We can't stick our heads in the sand.
No. Well, we can, but it's not going to really help much, is it?
Right.
Not going to do much.
It's not helpful.
And that's one of the big things we're all encountering when issues get this big and this existential, that there's just an overwhelming tendency for us to put our heads in the sand.
Mm-hmm.
And we can, it's easy to blame people for doing that and stuff, but we can all see we have that tendency too. We've all put our heads in the sand at certain things or looked away from certain things that weren't comfortable. And I can understand people doing that. I wish they didn't turn away, but that's part of it.
Yeah, that's the other part of how do I help people wake up, pay attention
Yeah.
to the earth, that keeps us alive, our human part of us alive.
Yes. Yeah. That's a great kind of living inquiry. I think it really is. what's most effective. I mean, because I can't talk about all the details about what we should be doing, but I think of what's most effective, because the biggest barrier we have is the human barrier, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
each other, communicating with
Absolutely.
each other, hearing each other. I think that's one of our biggest barriers, and we keep going right past it.
Yeah.
Because the issues are big, but boy, unless we can actually meet each other somehow. Yeah.
Meet each other and the earth.
And the earth, right. Meeting the earth is also meeting each other, isn't it?
True. Very true.
It's me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always liked great Alan Watts. One of his sayings that I love the most. He said the earth peoples like apple trees apple. You're like, we didn't drop down out of the heavens, right? We were birthed out of the earth, like apples getting birthed from apple trees that come from the earth. We didn't fall off a branch, and so we can see a certain separation there. But no earth, no you, no me. At least not walking around here. Yeah.
Well said. Beautiful.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Adya. Well, as we had planned, I'm wondering if we should make a little switch. I want to just plant a seed that if you have the availability after we come to the 2-hour mark, we'll end. But for those who want to stay for an after party, there are so many juicy, amazing questions that maybe we could address a few of them. But we'll see.
I'll be here.
Well, oh, great. Fantastic. You're very, very generous. Well, so we've talked a little bit about climate change itself, the emotional reactions we naturally have, the space in which we want to surround that and be with that consciousness, awareness. But the next sort of piece is action, right? So, where does non-duality, where's the rubber hit the road? How do we respond with our bodies, with our hands? So as we talked about, maybe we could do a little personal action exploration. I can do it as we had said, but I actually, I think since you're here, I want to offer you that again, and then kind of, debrief that.
When you say personal action, what are you getting at there?
Well, so we've been talking about how to meet
that I get.
Climate change emotionally. Now the question is, okay,
What
were we to face the overwhelm and so forth? Is there, and maybe there isn't for some people, how do we attune to the calling, the longing to be a demonstration of love in the world, meeting climate change?
Okay, now I got my hook.
Okay.
And it was the calling.
A calling.
What we really feel called to. Right, because each person, even in the environmental movement, right, people have very different callings within that. And I do think when we can, touch in with our calling, because our calling in its deepest sense often almost always has to do with what we love. Right, what we love, what we cherish, what we value. These things kind of inform our calling, and when we sense what our calling is, like what in this whole vast subject matter, what does one feel, how does one feel called to participate, right? Then you get your action. What am I going to do? But the thing is, Jonathan, especially with something as complex as climate change, God, there's an immense amount of education that I think any of us really need to do. I imagine most of the people in your audience are more educated about this than the average. They probably wouldn't be here if they weren't. But in something that's this sort of mercurial, moving all the time, even solutions are still very much being worked out. That our call to action, I think, can be at the same time quite passionate and needs to also remain quite open. I don't know that. I would love to hear what you have to say, Jonathan, because I know you contemplate these matters quite deeply, quite often.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think rather than me speaking about it, maybe a short guided meditation might be a good. Okay, so I'll just
Do that.
do a little short piece. So so I just invite folks to close your eyes if you wish. And the inquiry here is, how does life want to respond to climate change, overshoot, civilization collapse? But I'll use the word climate change. How does life want this one to respond? What's the next natural, obvious step? And for some of you, you can just, turn the recording off here, and that inquiry is enough. And for those who want a little more handholds, I'm going to speak some more. So if it's usually or often or too often unclear, I want to introduce a word, entelechy, a Greek word that comes from Aristotle. It means a thing's full fruition. It's full blossoming. As Aristotle said that the entelechy of an acorn is an oak. So through the tongue of the heart, you can issue a prayer, an invitation to your entelechy, the you that you would be if you, I don't know, worked on yourself for 100,000 years, the full ripening and fruition of you. I often use the word soul. And if it helps, you can imagine a nature setting or some other sort of sacred place. Any sacred place you see fit. You can stand or sit or lie down. And you're inviting this soul or entelechy, sort of midway, if you will, between ego, personality, human, and the absolute. The oldest and wisest version of you that you could possibly hope for, your very own soul. It helps, you can picture the room or space or field or ocean or mountains. And you can allow a perception or just a feeling, an experience of this subtle, wise space of soul or entelechy. And if you're listening to the recording, you might just pause here and really take time to get to know, to feel. It's like being in satsang with entelechy or soul. There's a kind of transmission. You're the junior partner and it's the senior partner. And if entelechy came in the form of a kind of a human that looks like you but older, you might just look into entelechy's eyes. And just receive its blessing and its love and its care. It's been you. Back in 2023, it was you. Again, just take as much time as you'd like and press pause if needed. And then the inquiry is this, and it may not respond immediately. You may get it tomorrow or the next day, but you ask Entelechy, if you'd like, how shall I respond? What is the action? What is the labor? What is the way I should love the world and meet climate change, etc. today, tomorrow? How might I be an instrument of positive change? There's 1,000 ways, Entelechy soul. Would you guide me, perhaps with an image or a feeling or a just knowing? And after you pray very deeply, just let go of this inquiry completely. And if something arises, note it. If nothing arises, that's fine. And you can do this meditation as many times as needed. So we'll just take a minute in silence. What does life want from me now in terms of acting on behalf of my love for the planet? Ding, ding, ding. It's me pretending to be a bell. So, excellent.
There we go.
So, I'd love one person to raise their hand who's willing to share what Entelechy, what soul, maybe there was an image or sense of what you're called to that you'd be willing to share. And then I'd love us to open up the chat for a moment so everyone can see, is what are you called to? If you're not called to anything now, that's okay. But just to affirm what you already know, maybe, or to affirm what is sort of freshly arriving through intuition, through imagination, which I think is one of the most powerful and underused faculties of a human being. So feel free to put that into the chat. And John, please. You'll have to unmute, John.
Great.
Yeah, so what came up for me initially was just very practical things of putting solar panels on. But as I stayed with it, this feeling of love came over me and warmth. And as I stayed with that, it was a love for myself that was really being called from me.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Wow.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Let's have a couple more people. How about Jay, Daly, Claire? Wonderful. How about Shodo? We can't hear you, Shodo. You're
I think
muted.
Muted, yeah.
There.
There we go.
Okay.
Great.
So I'm actually called, it's like this became clear 5 or 6 years ago. And so I was seeking connection with that. The calling is to be in communication and co-working with the non-humans, with every being. And I do include grains of sand and atoms and molecules in those, and not to think that we have to do it by ourselves. So that's the basic direction, and I've gotten quite over my head in trying to talk about it in organizations and so forth.
Thank you, Shodo.
Thank you,
Julie.
Shoda. I appreciate that.
I'm Julie.
Mhm.
The vision, the image of the entelechy was like halfway between solid and energy, sort of coming in and out, beautiful, deep eyes. And it reminded me of my love of photography and art, and that I need to share more of that with the world, and how I see life and earth and the love that I have for it through my photography and my art. And there's this poem that the first time I read it, it just so spoke to me, and the entelechy had me look at that again. Can I read a few lines from it? It's just profound. It's called St. Francis in the Sow by Galway Cannell. The bud stands for all things, even for those things that don't flower. For everything flowers from within of self-blessing, though sometimes it is necessary to reteach a thing its loveliness, to put a hand on its brow of the flower and retell it in words and in touch. It is lovely until it flowers again from within of self-blessing.
Lovely.
So thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Julie.
Oh, yeah.
Hello, Jonathan. Hello, Adya. So great to see you here today. I just finished wiping my tears because it was a very emotional encounter. It felt as a complete unconditional love. And that was probably the main message of not being afraid, that everything just going exactly how it's supposed to be, and that I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. And that whatever help is needed is always there. And I think unconditional love and working on myself, and that's the only thing that I can control, that everything else is possible to influence only through my own work on who I am in this life.
Beautifully stated. That's lovely. Thank you.
Two more. Let's go to Eileen and then Marianne.
Yeah, so we're sharing what had inspired in us for action, right? Yeah. So it's sort of related to a question. I'll try and keep it brief. This idea of rebellion and taking your rage and like creating disruption. I was doing a lot of that work like 3 years ago, and then it kind of burnt me out because everybody seemed really angry and upset all the time. And it felt like it conflicted with like what I knew to be true. So I sort of stopped. But I felt this like guilt and kind of absence, because it was really fulfilling my heart to like get in the streets and physically do something that disrupted traffic, that made a big scene. We were, in New York City, so you have a big audience, but it was still finding that line, because I found activists were kind of burnout and kind of negative a lot. So I was just feeling that passion again for the art of activism in an urban environment to really create a dramatic message live in the streets. And I'm really grateful to reconnect to that, because I got really burnt out. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. And Marianne.
Thank you. I became an activist for oak trees in my community. I live in a senior community in Walnut Creek, California. And I started out being very zealous. And I started thinking about, during this meditation, about respect. Because I have found recently that having respect and considering the other person who is what I consider my opponent, but actually what I'm beginning to recognize is that person is not my opponent. That person is another human being, and that I can have respect for him and come to him with a feeling of, let's work together on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I have made a friend of someone who used to be what I considered an enemy. And I feel like that was such a huge change for me. Right now, what I'm struggling with is my loss of feeling committed. And I just think it's kind of a spiritual awakening thing that's happening. And I will get back to it. But what I got most out of today was being okay with not being okay. And I can be okay with myself not being okay and with others not being okay. And that was huge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. That was lovely. Really appreciate that. Yeah. It's like Jonathan's making his way back.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, being okay with not being okay. That was perfectly put. I couldn't add anything to that. Yeah.
I really liked also, Mary, your sort of reflection there about, you know, of trying not to see things in this, you know, this adversarial view all the time, right? Because if we're just in it to win, then we'll be in eternal conflict. Somehow we've got to be able to talk to each other and like I loved what you, and respect, right? Respect people that have different views and see if we can understand those views in a point. So I think it's so important. Yeah, so important.
Well, thank you again, Marianne. Well, we have about 14 minutes left. There's a few things I'd like us to attempt to do. So at the beginning, before we hit record, we did a little poll, and it turns out this group, 88% of this particular group, doesn't mean we're right, but it's what we feel that we have passed tipping points already, and that we're headed for more, which seem unavoidable. And then there are other people, even like more intense, the 30% of that 88, feel that the momentum in the system actually is a situation where we're facing runaway catastrophe, global warming, partial extinction. I don't have a position. I don't know. I'm like very like pliable, apparently. When I read, you know, the International Panel on Climate Change and they say what they say, I go, okay, well, that must be true. And then I listen to my friend and colleague, Michael Dowd, who's like, no, we're absolutely past all the tipping points. And I know he's done so much research. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's true. So I want to presence that part for a moment. How he suggested if he ever did one of these programs with us, he would call it, you know, decline, end of civilization, overshoot as spiritual teacher, which would be a hell of a marketing, you know, thing. But I think I really took it seriously, which is why I'm asking you, how, if it ends up being that dire, and there's certainly some scientists who are clearly pointing to that situation, how could that be spiritual teacher? Like, part of my mind resists it like, no, total or near total extinction. So maybe you could just sort of, for those 88% of us who are, leaning into that notion, that's, my mind just goes splat. That's not like the end of my village or the end of my family, the end of the Homo sapien experiment.
Yeah. Yeah. Could be. I think underlying a lot of this is the fear of death. Because this is an existential issue, right? And existential in this sense means it's well, not only potential death, but a lot of death has already happened. And that's a really important, I mean, in this issue and in the stuff I do in spirituality, until we've really confronted our fear of death and really dealt with that, it is going to be a motivating factor in practically everything we do without us knowing it. So I wouldn't want to, depends how sort of anxiety prone anybody is. If somebody wasn't anxiety prone, I would say, yeah, go ahead and contemplate the end of the universe. And you can really get a handle on death and yours specifically. But I certainly wouldn't do that to everybody or even most people, because, just to overwhelm somebody completely, it's not constructive. I'm all about what's constructive, right? What can move somebody, but I think different people have different ways of orienting towards things like this. Things like this, where I always go, and this is just my own personal way of encountering it. I always go like, okay, I'll ask myself, Adya, go to the worst, contemplate the worst. Until you find some amount of balance with the worst, right? Contemplating the worst is just it's totally imaginary, right? And we have no idea what's going to happen. That's the truth. We have no idea where this is ultimately going to end, or what we'll come up with or not come up with. But boy, oh boy, is the contemplation of our demise certainly a spiritually rich area. This just adds, this is kind of like contemplation of death with steroids, on steroids, because then it would be human beings, or even beyond that, right? All sorts of extinctions. Species have already been extinct. This isn't something hasn't happened yet. Happens almost every couple of minutes. So that's part of it too.
So one response, I hear at least two responses. One is, if a person is prone to anxiety, this is not the prescribed practice, is the end of the universe, and for obvious reasons. It's like, maybe just, you don't have to go there. Right. And
it is there though, and everybody that's tuning into this, it's the background.
Yeah.
Right? We all know that. It's a potential background, and we all have different ways of feeling about that. Sorry about Jonathan, I think I interrupted you there. Yeah.
Well, I hear you saying that climate change is a confrontation with death.
Yeah.
That personal, existential. I mean, in the future, tomorrow and 100 years, we'll see what happens. But right now, contemplating the end of Homo sapiens and other species is itself that existential, we're right in the crosshairs.
Yeah.
And if you weren't a very anxious person, you could take that practice, that steroidal practice, all the way.
You could, like I said, it's there as a background for everybody. So it's kind of like, how much do you really want to, or do you feel like you're really ready to look at it? But I don't want it to become, it's not really constructive to get too morbid, about these things, because then that just sort of triggers more negativity that doesn't really help us. But like I said, it's been one of the most amazing spiritual practices that's been handed down in almost every contemplative tradition I know, is some contemplation of our own non-existence. Now, why would we even do that? Now, in the context of what we're talking about today, the reason, if somebody was called to even look into that, would be so you could actually be more effective at whatever you're doing. More effective, not so you can hide in a cave or shy away, but so you can actually be more effective. Nice little benefit that if you've encountered your own non-existence in some way, that anxiety then will not be driving you as yours, right? You still can have the compassion and the heartbreak of, a species possibly disappearing, or those species that already have disappeared. That's, we can have that. But yeah, I think it's all these existential issues. This is one of them. That's what's underlying all of them.
Yeah.
Right. It's, oh my God, we might not make it, or I might not make it.
Well, I know I'm not going to make it.
We're guaranteed.
I guess actually, I know the universe isn't going to make it. And
no,
what do they call it? Heat death. The star.
Humanity's not going to make it forever. Right? 10 billion years from now, I think that, well, a lot less than that. The sun will have swallowed up our nice little planet here, and things will have moved on. But fine. But we are here, and we are here right now. And we want to do the best we can.
So along these lines, the last question is, how can we tell how much we are ready for? So how much do we actually peer over the abyss and see, oh, these are some of the possibilities that some scientists are suggesting. What's your advice on how close we get to that news, how much we look over that abyss?
I think it's different for each person.
Yeah. So, but how do we know for ourselves? Like, I don't know what my tolerance is for abyss gazing.
This is sort of an obvious what I'm going to say here, Jonathan. But if you felt like you were getting so frightened or anxious, that it wasn't a positive movement, that it was more disabling you in the sense that you found yourself overwhelmed, then it's not particularly constructive, right? It's sort of like if you let your heart break. Well, a half broken heart is actually harder to deal with than a heart that's almost completely closed. So if you open, you don't want to go halfway. By the way, I don't want us to get too hung up on a practice of contemplating, death, or even the worst thing that can pop. I imagine this population of people that are listening to us right now are probably quite educated, I would, in general, about what's happening. Like I said, Jonathan, I'm interested in we become educated enough so that we have something really constructive to offer, right? But we can overeducate ourselves, right? You can open the newspaper or the computer and read the same terribly frightening stuff that we've read for the last 5 years, and you just keep rehashing it and making yourself more and more angry, more and more upset, more and more anxious. If all that led to a better outcome, fine, but it doesn't. So I do think that's what I mean. We do have to be a little sensitive of how much exposure elicits something that feels creative and touches in with like where your guided meditation was, right? With that soul quality, and how much just isn't serving me or the world or my purpose, right? Does it actually serve my purpose to get completely freaked out every single day because I read too much overwhelming information? You get it? So like a lot of things we're talking about today, it's paradox, isn't it? Right? You want to expose yourself. You want to know what, you want to be educated. You want to be informed. But in today's world, it's very easy for any of us to be overinformed.
Yeah.
Like we know it, but we just keep knowing the same thing every day until you're panicked. It just doesn't help. So, and everybody's barometer of how much they can take in is different, I find. It can be different from any different on a given day or a given week.
Yeah, that sounds like excellent advice to me. The courage to inform ourselves, with the wisdom to know when it's enough and when it's too much, and we're beginning to become a puddle on the ground and serving nobody.
Because that can become, even though it's negative and makes us feel scared, and like you said, a puddle on the ground, it can be highly addictive. Even though you don't, why would I be addicted to that? I don't get high in any good sense, but it can be. If you wonder, why am I exposing myself to the same stuff that I already know over and over and over and over again? Something addictive going on, right? And that whole system is set up so we become as addicted to technology as we possibly can. So I think we do have to feel while maintaining some integrity, right? Like, oh, I can't take any of this, I'll just pull back and won't look at the issue. Well, probably a little lack of integrity or courage going on there, right? With this crowd, I don't think we got to worry about that much, but yeah, I think it's an important issue, right?
Yeah.
We have to have enough emotional well-being that we can be positive forces in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the people that have positive change in the world, whether it's spiritual leaders or business leaders or any kind of, you look at those people, there's a similarity. They tend to be highly positive, highly action-oriented. Here's the problem. Okay, let's roll up our sleeves and see what we can do. Those are the people that change the world. You and I sitting cowering in a corner, that doesn't help the world. We might do that from time to time because we can't avoid it, or somebody can't avoid it. But so I'm really trying to make a tie here, not very succinctly, but a tie between our emotional well-being and open-heartedness, right? Without becoming sort of narcissistic about our own emotional state, but that and how positively and effectively we can deal with this great challenge. And again, we each have to intuitively feel what's that level of exposure where I feel positively inspired or just overwhelmed. Yeah.
Well, how about this? I'm going to offer a few announcements and then have you close the formal meeting with, I'll tell you what the question is and you don't have to answer it. If in 1 or 2 minutes, your most pith advice to a human who's concerned about climate change. That'll be my final question to you, and you can take it any way you see fit.
I'm glad you reserved the easiest one for last.
Of course, it makes the good soundbite for Facebook or whatever it is.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right, so a couple of announcements. If you are new to Adyashanti, I highly suggest you go to opengatesangha.org, and he offers meetings, I believe, on Sundays and Wednesdays, one on Sunday a month, maybe one on Wednesday a month. You'll see a calendar. And it's just a good way to experience him in his own habitat, doing the work that he cherishes, that I think he's done beautifully. I've been his student since about 98 or 99. He's just really one of the finest non-dual teachers out there. So, and some of those meetings are free. So I suggest you go there. And I would also say, my opinion, that having that, what shall we call it, resource that meditation offers can be really helpful to we who consider ourselves either strongly and out as activists or in our quiet activism. Here at PGI, I want to put 2 things on your radar. One is the Purpose Discovery Program. We offer it 1 time a year in September. And as I was sort of pointing to with the soul and teleki meditation, it's a deep dive, 24 meetings where people who want to take the spiritual journey of really listening to, embodying, metabolizing soul, your deepest longing, not the longing that I have for jazz and skiing, which I love, but that kind of deeper, like, is there something here that's really calling, a longing, a deeper purpose? And then there's a second program I'll put on your radar. I'm calling it Portals to Awakening. And there are 8 non-dual meditations for each of the 8 weeks. One of them is Adya's true meditation, though he won't be teaching it. I will attempt to be doing so. And there'll also be Nisargadatta Maharaja's I Am meditation, and Ramana Maharshi's self-inquiry, and Kashmir Shaivism, the tantric approach, and many others. Parmenides, we're going to make an attempt. I do put the word attempt to teach incubation. So you can check that out if you'd like. And the final thing that I want to request is that you consider making a donation. We do this with no paywall, because we want anyone and everyone to be able to attend these Climate Change as Spiritual Teacher events. And then, and we didn't mean to be deceiving, and then we ask for a donation from those of you who feel moved to do so. Usually we get about 3 to 5% of the people who sign up giving us a donation. And in all honesty, that doesn't work financially for us very well, because it does cost thousands of dollars to put this on. So if you are not in the place where you can give a donation, don't worry about it. This is my pleasure. It's a gift, zero pressure on you to give anything. If you are in the place to do so, you'll see, if you're listening to the recording, at the bottom, there's a link. If you're listening right now on YouTube, there's a link in the chat or on the bottom. Here on Zoom, there should be something in the chat. And I would just ask you to just click it now, just so that it's open and that you can peruse it and see if it's true for you to offer a donation. So far, we've had Joanna Macy, Terry Patton, and Charles Eisenstein, and now Adya. And so we want to keep this series going. And it's a diversity of perspectives, and we like it that way. We're not pigeonholing ourselves with one type of climate view, and we hope that people really benefit from that. And if you're in the position to be a major donor, that would be great. We've got one single $100 donation, and things like that really help us a lot. Catherine, am I missing anything before Adya has the last word?
Nope.
Nope. Great. Adya, going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
1 or 2 minute pith. How do we meet this climate change situation? What is your advice?
Yeah. First, an acknowledgement for all of us that when we dive into areas like this, it's of course very easy to get solely focused on what we're against. And it's okay to be focused on what you're against, because in a certain sense that, gives you a certain direction. But once we're really engaging in almost any way, I think it really is much more powerful when we focus on what we're for. We can burn immense amount of energy focusing on what we're against, when we could put a lot of that energy into what we're for. So I understand in something like this, there's going to be the people that we see are bigger perpetrators of the degradation of the environment, and it's easy to get very focused on being against them, and it's okay to see what you're up against. That's perfectly fine. But my suggestion is that, like I said, we're just so much more potent, powerful forces in the world when we're really oriented towards what am I for? Going back to kind of what Jonathan with the soul work and the meditation that he was doing there. And I think for activists, because I've talked to a lot of activists over a lot of years of all sorts of different things. And I think that this is a challenge to anybody in activist community. It's not easy to really stay, have the majority of our energy being channeled through what we're for. It's just a much more powerful kind of energy. And like I said, I would suggest that if we look throughout history, that kind of orientation tends to have the most positive and powerful effects, at least here in the relative world. That's for sure. So what we're for. And I think that creative imagination can be really, really useful of, like I said, some of the work that Jonathan was just doing with us with the meditation can be very, very powerful in accessing what you're for. And lastly, when you have that negative sense of against and creating those separations, I'm not suggesting that you have to create a new separation against that, right? Because we will do that occasionally. We will create those separations. We will get a little too attached to what we're against. When that comes up, we just acknowledge it. That's just there. And that's probably not going to make me as powerful a force as I could be if I was really focused on what you're really for, what really inspires you. It's a very powerful energy in the world. Yeah, that would be my closing little.
That's a great closing.
piece.
Know what you're for and allow yourself to be inspired to move forward with it.
Yeah, and acknowledge just one last thing, Jonathan, just because I don't want this to be like overly idealistic. You will get caught and have a negative view. You will get a little afraid. You will get anxious at times. You will get overwhelmed at times. Like that's just part of it. Anybody does that who takes a deep dive into scary things. So I don't want to make us have a sense that you can just do away with all of that and just be this positive sort of force. But I do think when we really understand, wow, I can actually have a much more impact if I have sort of this more inspired, motivating force. And by that, I mean, not just that we feel like good and inspired, but also that we're open and connecting, especially with those who we see as opposed to our view. That's part of what I mean too. It's open and connecting kind of, and I think positive energy does that. Makes us feel open and connecting.
Yeah. We don't have to be with our inspiration alone. We can connect with others and know that it's non-optional for 99.99999% of humans to experience overwhelm. That's okay. We don't have to beat ourselves up.
Yeah. And we're damn lucky that we can be sitting here talking about this right now. That's really lucky that we can be here doing that, right? We're not in whatever. We're not in some war just trying to protect, hoping your kids don't get killed or something. We shouldn't forget that. There's a whole lot of human beings that are literally just getting by. They're trying to survive. And for us to be able to really contemplate this issue and really try to make some positive contributions, as challenging as that can be, it's not as challenging as a lot of other areas you could find yourself in life. So in a certain sense, we all have a certain luck that we can be doing this at all.
Yeah. I personally find that to be really important part of my equanimity to realize, I'm not in Syria, I'm not in North Korea, I'm not on the front lines in Ukraine. I have the privilege to be in a relatively safe place, abundant food and electricity. So taking some time to let in the good is
every now and then. It's not a bad
every
thing.
now and then.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
Well, we're at time, but there are a few hands. It'll be all right to just take a couple of questions to end our time. I see Carolyn and Bob and Farhad and Jeremy. Perhaps we can put them up. Great. Carolyn, and then Farhad.
Well, I put my, I put my hand up a long time ago to give an experience, so I don't really have a question, but I'd like to just share that I find it a very dynamic parallel to be getting older. I'm in my 80s, and my own physical and so on decline with the decline of the planet. And I every day have asked myself, how then shall I live in these times? And these two go parallel, but sometimes they sort of collide and then parallel again. And I'm a cancer survivor of 40 years almost. And when I had cancer, I didn't know if I was working on living or working on dying, preparing for living or dying. And they seemed very, very far apart to me. And as time went on, they got closer and closer and closer until I realized it was one and the same who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And that was to live this day as best I could, so that if I should die tomorrow, I would not regret how I lived this day. And we don't know how many more days we have. I think we're in very serious trouble if we don't change our ways. And so each day is more and more precious. And how we live it, we do have some choices about that. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Carolyn.
you, Carolyn. Lovely.
Farhad, Bob, and Jeremy.
Hi, Adia. Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for the opportunity. I have a bit of a confusion because of like my spiritual interest and training is a bit of a mishmash. I was interested in Sufism and also like in Advaita Vedanta, and I've been following your teachings, Adia, as well. The picture, like, that I get from like, the type of mysticism like Sufism that come from Abrahamic religions is that about consciousness is like God, or consciousness is this Godhead that has a plan after all, and it's like some interest also in this dualistic ways of perceiving the world, and there is a agenda or something, but it's like beyond our understanding. But what I get from like Advaita Vedanta or Buddhism is like this just most of a aware space, but has no agenda, no plan, no interest whatsoever about what happens in the dualistic, ways of things. And first of all, I want to check if this is this gap is like the way I understand is something that you see to be true as well. And following that, I wonder if the way you describe, like, in the end of your world, for a person really hitting a wall and really the world coming to the end, becoming a new beginning, a transition to a different state. As a collective, we could have that too, like, to go through this disaster, and the ones who survive really lay out a different way, a more awakened, evolved way of living. Could that be true?
I suppose it could be true, but I'm a little suspicious of it. Where my mind always goes to is right here, right now, day to day. I don't know what if the absolute has a plan or not a plan, or, any of that. But right here, right now, today, this moment. Thing about this moment is not only for everybody, but me too. Deeply in this moment, it will kind of rob us of whatever our position is. Whatever anything we might be holding to, right? And with the potential to open up a new vista. So there's so much of this that we don't really know. And of course, the traditions have their explanations, don't they, right? Of all, and they're not all the same explorations. They're sort of, I always think of them as sort of like a mythic depiction of the deepest of deep human revelatory experience. How do we put that into words? How do we communicate that? And yeah, there was a lot in what you said, my friend. So there's a lot to contemplate there. I appreciate that, though.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Nice to have you here.
Thanks. Thanks, Farhad. Bob and Jeremy.
Yeah, as you mentioned a little while ago, that overshoot climate change is one of our backgrounds now, whether we realize it or not. Just kind of like the nuclear hammer has been a background on my life since I've been born, hiding under desk and everything. And whether we think about it or not, it's there in the background, affecting us, affecting our society, affecting our system that we operate under and stuff. So, but it was, as I was listening to you a few minutes ago, a thing popped in my head. Says when the Buddha died, his consciousness did not die. And when Jesus died, his consciousness did not die. And I'm one of the in the survey. I'm one of the 3%. And yet, since I've gotten to the point that I'm at, I feel like that for me, that I need to go ahead and try and concentrate on or try and find out or have the transcendence of what the divine wants me to do in this lifetime right now. I understand what you were talking about a minute ago, that you need to concentrate on every day and let that day be as good as you can that day and stuff. And hopefully that helps me get to where I need to go. It's kind of like the serenity prayer that Jonathan was kind of referring to a little while ago, knowing what you can change and what you can't change and stuff. I know that it's my responsibility to change myself. And that's the only thing I know that I can be responsible for. So that's what I want to try and do. So that's just a statement. I had some other questions, but I want to open it up for some other people too. So
thank you for that, Bob. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Thanks, Bob, for being with us.
Yeah.
Good to meet you. Jeremy.
Yes, hi. Thank you for this. A big part of my work in the world is about changing the frame around climate change. And I just wanted to share one reflection that in some way mirrors what Carolyn said really beautifully about living well and dying well, looking similar. And also about what Adya said about connection being an important part of this. And I was just reflecting, when you speak to hospice nurses, that they say that the thing that people often say on the hospice bed is, I wish I'd devoted more time to meaningfully connecting with the people around me and in my life. And if we take this to be a potential hospice moment and embrace the idea of meaningful connection, not just with other humans, but with other animals, plants, with the earth itself, the soil, the air, that is both what will give us the greatest likelihood of finding a way through this, of seeing the sacred in all that's around us and honoring it and having the change of consciousness where we no longer feel compelled to throw plastic in the oceans or burn down forests. And if indeed it's too late, it will give us the most beautiful outro possible. And so in that way, there's a kind of peace, I feel, in if we take that as the root, and that's the frame shift that I'm called to share in the world. If we have meaningful connection be what we're here for, seeing the sacred, what we're here for, it can only lead to either living as beautifully or dying as beautifully as we possibly could.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeremy. I really appreciate that. I really, really like that, because I very much think along those lines of connection is the major reframe we need to do. This thing is kind of framed as a galactic battle in many ways, and I don't think that's going to get us very far. I think it's something where we're connecting with each other and getting to know each other, especially the people that we don't know. So important. So important. I really like that frame. Yeah, I think it's a really important one.
And it just arises in me to say that this is an action also, this conversation, and it's important to physicalize it. But we are alchemizing this in this conversation, and it's quite beautiful. And thank you so much for creating this space.
Yeah. Thank you for contributing. Yeah.
Good to meet you, Jeremy. Maybe 2 more folks, and then we'll call it a day. And actually, Catherine, I'll let you have the final question if you have one. So let's do 2 more folks, and then Catherine, and we'll bring it in for a landing.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So Elizabeth and then Dot.
Hi, Adya. Good to see you.
Oh, hi, Elizabeth.
In Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
I had a question. I'm really involved in trying to promote legislation and candidates who will move practices that will be sustainable for our country. And so that means that I have my eyes on the news so that I can write up asks and put out information within the community about who they can call and what they can do and those kinds of actions. It really rings true for me that I have a fear of death when I check the news and it says COP 26 or 27 or whatever, that they haven't done enough and that we're really behind. I have children. I have people that I love, and I've been a practicing Zen Buddhist for 30 years, but definitely that probably that it would be a fear of death comes up. And so I was wondering, how do you practice with that on a daily basis? Because it seems like it's kind of death by 1,000 cuts in a way. If you're called to really, I'm kind of a researcher. If you're called to be the person who puts information out in bite-sized pieces so that other people can act on it, that means that I'm putting my nose out in this garbage every day. And
you sure are.
Yeah, it can get really intense sometimes.
Yeah, I imagine it does. Yeah, I can see it. The death part, I think the most effective way to, this may not even sound like an encounter with death, but it certainly will bring you there along the way, is really a kind of, when we start to meditate on and contemplate really deeply, not just as something we've heard before, but as something that's really deep. What am I really? If you really take that, we start to see that all these constituent parts of ourselves that we've identified with and found ourselves in are actually just little pieces floating, and they don't actually tell us who we are. And as we see that, rather than hear it, but as we see that, each of those little things we see through that we formerly thought composed of our identity, it's a little death. Oh, I thought that thing that I did was who I am, but actually it's something I'm doing. It's not who I am. That's at that moment, if we really see it, that's a little death. Right? It's a little death of a little piece of identity. So I think that contemplation of who or what am I really, but as a means of sort of exposing all the things we've identified with. And when we see when all that is exposed, or whatever amount is exposed that we've identified with, the interesting thing is you always see whatever you're identified with, even as the language we use, like right now, the way I'm talking, right? The way we identify with something, even in the language we're using, there's distance. Even to say, I'm identified with being really angry, let's say, just take that out of the blue, right? I'm angry and I'm really attached to that. And, but wait a minute, you're also observing that you're really attached to being angry. Right? So you get it?
I do get it. And what about the blood?
Yeah. Well, the what about the blood part is what we're actually doing to make the world a better place. That's one. And number two is if we do get access to transcendence, that we're using it as a sort of a ground from which to engage rather than a ground into which we try to hide. Right? Okay. Yeah. So I think if we see the deeper, or even if you just feel like, let's take it out of like deep advanced spiritual states or something. Not that they're not available to everybody, but let's just take it as you feel peace one day. And what would it be to act in such a way that you are embodying that? Or if you feel love, you walk up to somebody, you could just say hi like you always do. But if, say, you just happen to be having a good day and you're feeling open-hearted, what might it be to actually embody that as a human being in the encounter with the next person? See, because then we're taking our like states of consciousness or our emotional state, if it's positive or constructive, and there's an avenue through which we can embody that rather than only experience it. Does it make? I know it can sound a little bit not super specific, but I find when people really just kind of contemplate this, what would it be to embody my deepest, my passions and concerns, but really, it's the embodiment part that addresses the blood, right? If we don't go to embodiment, we never addressed anything, do we? We're just I feel great, so.
I'm really embodied.
Yes, I know.
Maybe the practice that you suggested about grounding into the pelvis and then allowing that concern for, your loved ones and for the state of the world to arise and to deal with it from that perspective, because
I love it when people teach themselves. Elizabeth, you're giving yourself such wonderful teaching right now. My answer is yes, yes, and yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good for you, right? That's the inner teacher right there. All right. I don't want to step on that one. Okay. Great.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Catherine, you can put yourself on the screen. We are at 2:30, so I'm going to ask you, Dot, and Catherine to get right to the questions so we can end. Dot, please.
Oh, thank you, Catherine. Is that, yeah. She's disappeared. There's nothing, the greatest teacher in the world is Zoom. Adya, I just want to reconnect with you. Maybe you couldn't possibly remember me, I don't think. But the first time I ever saw you was at Coben's memorial up at what is now Jikoji, which was Bodhi Pippin. Yeah. And you were a young guy, a monk, and I wondered, who is that gorgeous young man running around here? Who does he think he is?
Yeah.
Anyway, I loved your meditation, except you never, because I've been reconciling opposites, attempting to reconcile opposites forever, tensions between this and this. But the way you did that was so beautiful, to go into the hara and just hold them. It's so obvious, and wonderful. But you never said a word about breath. Anyway, that's what I use Zoom as my teacher to try to keep me humble and modest and just being here. So what I really want to address is about climate change. I tried to put my whatever on the chat, and I don't know, I sent it just to one person, but I have been following Gandhi and the Buddha, and it seems to me that climate change is just a symptom.
Mhm.
It's a symptom of the three poisons of separation, of dividedness, of the thinking we're separate from each other. And really, Gandhi, I've followed nonviolence and transparency. You were talking about how do we meet people just naked, open, transparent. So the ultimate solution, the only way to have peace is for us to see that we're not separate from anybody else. Interdependence, be Shambhala warriors, be transparent and open. Because the issues, the separate issues, whether it's climate change or overpopulation or the corporate takeover of the world, it's all about greed, desire, wanting more, being fearful or hateful, thinking that we're separate from each other.
I so appreciate what you're saying. Could just the question so we can,
Yeah.
Well, I would agree with you that separation is an immensely important issue of all this kind of stuff. Absolutely. And that's a big part of what, the spiritual endeavor is about, right? It's trying to bridge the apparent separation, realizing there isn't any, not only with other people, but the world around us. And boy, when you experience yourself to be the world around you,
Right.
yeah, your attitudes about just about everything shift radically. Yeah.
Right. Buddha,
And
Dharma.
and while the whole world is coming into its fully enlightened state, between now and then, we've got a little work to do.
Let's be realist. It ain't gonna happen. But we still addressing my conscience, or each of us, we have to do what we can do, and just to be a model, be yourself, and do what you can do as one person. Be harmless. Become more primitive. More.
That's actually a nice way of putting it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I am primitive. Just hands on the earth, hands in the ground.
I know. Me too.
Breathing. Thank you.
I refer to myself, to Mukti, my wife, all the time as a caveman.
Well,
as a caveman.
Yeah. I'm a one. Yeah.
So
that's
anyway,
good.
Thank you.
Nice to talk with you, dear.
Thank you, Dot.
Yeah, thank you, Dot.
And the last question goes to Catherine.
Hi, Catherine.
Thank you. My question just ties right into what Dot was sharing about this, just the visceral experience of interconnectedness and how that can grow as our spiritual practice deepens often. And so I was just curious to hear what you've noticed as far as that experience of interconnectedness, feeling these big transformations that the world is going through as being not somewhere else, but right here. How does that impact how we perceive and feel and respond to some of these issues that we've been talking about?
How does it, can you restate that for me again? Or I'm not sure I'm getting the whole, there's a piece of it that I'm missing, I think. And I don't think it was you. I think it was probably me not quite getting it.
It might be that I'm coming up with this question since Jonathan called my name. But there's something very, very, there's something that shifts our perception of these issues when we open to the non-conceptual experience of
Yeah.
interconnectedness. And so I was curious if you could share a little bit about what you've noticed about that, that experience of interconnectedness in the face of these very physical, dramatic transformations that the earth and humanity is going through.
Thank you for the question.
Am I still on? Could
Mhm.
I speak?
Well, let me respond to Catherine first, please. Well, I want to go to just that experience of interconnectedness, because I think it often, when you read a spiritual text or listen to spiritual talks, it can get a little abstracted, can it? And as you were suggesting, or I think as I sense as you're talking, the actual experience of real connectedness to the point of an identity with the whole, in a certain sense. It's not this like high thing that's hovering above anything. It's actually right down in the bones and marrow, and that feeling of connection is intimate, right? Isn't it? It's intimate. It's very close. It's I was going to say it's similar like when you're deeply in love, but it's even of a different category than that, right? It's a whole different category. And I think this intimate connection with life is something that in one sense we're called to. And it's at the same time, human beings tend to be afraid of it also, right? And when we feel, to the extent that we feel a real connectedness, I think for me anyway, the feeling of connectedness, it kind of lowers the temperature on everything. It just makes everything feel grounded, connected here. Oh, it's easy to breathe now. It's a very, 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 very simple thing in one sense. And yet, like, when you're in love, really, really in love, right? How do you tend to treat the person you're in love with? Or how would you like to treat the person you're in love with? Something like that is my attitude about the environment. Do you know what I mean? Something like that is my attitude. That's how I feel about the environment, about it. It doesn't feel other than me. And it doesn't feel other than you, right? It's not about me or you or you or you or you or you. And I think that any amount of that connectedness really ties in with that positive motivation, because then it's about love and connection and compassion, and it's not about defeating the opposition. We will never defeat the opposition because there will always be opposition. If not in this realm, in some other realm. I think there's a different thing that can happen. Yeah, I think there really, really is. Yeah.
Yeah, it also takes it away from what we think we should be doing to just receiving it as a mystery, as you say, day by day.
Right.
That's
By the way, I
completely
have no idea what anybody should be doing. Like, even though I'm here, I don't have anything inside me that says everybody should be an activist or everybody should be anything. The only thing I'm interested in is each person connecting with really what lights them up. That's really what's interesting, and in the way that it does it, right? So for some person, it could be, man, they're going out on the streets and they're engaging and they're really going out there. Somebody else, if they connect with their soul essence, as Jonathan was saying, or their soul purpose, totally different. Maybe what they're called to do is just to appreciate as much of the world as they can possibly do. That's their contribution. but when we sink into that more, again, as Jonathan articulated, that soul level articulation of ourself, we have to go into it, as it says in the good book, right? What's the quote? Anyway, we enter the kingdom of heaven naked, or we don't enter at all. Right? It's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle and all that stuff, right? Than a rich man to get into heaven. And the riches is all the stuff we bring in there. The shoulds, the shouldn'ts, the da-da-da-da-da-da. We never get in. And as soon as we kind of like just start to see that and realize it's not actually our true identity, it becomes so loose and so much more, cloud-like instead of solid, that we can just sort of slip out of it. Yeah, but that's the kingdom, right? That's the connected place, right?
And then those small actions don't really seem so small.
No, we shouldn't be attached to small or big. That's the thing. I mean, I meet this with activists a lot of time activists think, if I'm not doing something grand, something that has the potential to change the whole world, then, what's the point? Well, there is a point. And the small things really count. And a lot of the biggest things in life come from very small little seeds. Yeah. That's why I think when we can sense into what's intrinsic, just the intrinsic embodiment of that love and that compassion and that connection, without an idea of what it should be like, we can each discover what it's like for us. I'm very wary of anybody's idea of what we should all be doing. That's a little too authoritarian for me, right? So thank you for sharing that, Karen.
Well, thank you so much, Adya.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Catherine and Adya. Adya, just so much gratitude for being open to this invitation. I know you get, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of invitations, and to be here for climate change as spiritual teacher, I feel personally just supported in my soul level purpose. And more importantly, I just am so glad that you've taken this time with all of these people to explore what's a pretty tough subject.
It is a tough subject. Thank you for saying that, all that nice stuff, Jonathan. I appreciate that. And as I've told you before, I don't do many interviews and stuff, especially nowadays. Just not really called to do a lot. But as I've told you personally, the work you do around the soul work and the environmental work is something I value so much that I want to be part of supporting that. So me being here is a reflection of how important and valuable I think this kind of work is that you're doing. Whether it's on this subject or the soul work, I think they're intimately linked. So that's why I'm here, because I value what you're doing, and I value that there's this many people that kind of want to dive in, on a challenging, subject that people have such a diversity of views on and all that. So I'm really feel grateful to be able to come here and be with all of you. It really is. Been very enjoyable.
Deep thanks.
Yeah.
Well, we are at the end. Please, if you're listening to the recording, consider subscribing to this channel. 2, please consider a donation that you'll see at the bottom to support this work of climate change as spiritual teacher. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that on May 13th, Adya, in his, I don't know what happened, I got him on some kind of day, he said yes to yet another invitation. On May 13th, there'll be something called the Non-Dual Roundtable. Adyashanti, Rupert Spira, and John Pendergast, who are 3 extraordinary non-dual teachers I'll be moderating. We will be doing a deep dive. So look out for that. There's no link yet. And that's it.
Right.
We're done.
Wonderful. Wonderful to
Thank
be
you
with
for all that
of you,
time.
my friends. Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day, Adya.
I will. I
Mwah.
will.
Give
I'll
my
go
love
out and
to Mukti.
admire the snow and the 17-degree temperature.
Yeah. Pretty cold up there.
Yeah.
All right. Lots
All
of love
right.
to you and lots of
See
love
y'all.
to everybody.
Mm.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.